Good afternoon, welcome back to the main stage. I am super excited to announce our next speaker. We have Suzanne Daniels, and she'll be talking about, wow, improving developer experience with back office.
With Backstage.
Backstage.
Yeah.
Wow, I set the bar low for you. High five. Have a wonderful talk.
High five. So, folks, thank you for joining this session, still being awake at this hour. Are we doing a bit good? Come on. Good. So let's start off with a question. Hope my thing works. There you go. Okay. So who onboarded ever at a company as a developer? Cool. So who actually liked the onboarding experience? Okay, that's not many. Wow. Okay, who can find all the documentation and information in their organization they actually need? Well, few. Okay. Who can make sense of all the things that other teams in your company are doing and really understand it? Cool. So these are a few things that we happen to know a bit about, being at Spotify. So I'm Suzanne Daniels. I'm a developer relations lead at Spotify, specifically for an open source project called Backstage. And Backstage happens to be a platform for creating your developer portal. It is not a developer portal, it's an open source project. And you can build a portal with that yourself and address certain problems. So wait, what? That's weird, right? A music company creating this open source project related to developer experience. I'm going to stand still. So that's a bit weird. So how did we came to get at that point? So let's listen to a little Spotify story. So a lot has been written and drawn about the Spotify engineering culture. It's hugely complex. It's a complex organization. We're famously known for the autonomy of our teams, and that we value that very much. But we also have a huge technology stack. It's all hyper-growth, and people like to write and talk about the engineering culture at Spotify. If you ever went to such a talk, it's maybe the case that it's not really the truth in our kitchen, but it might have been for some team at some point. It's super complex. But we started out as a small team. Like if you look at a little bit over a decade ago, we would have this small engineering team of about 6 people. You could put them in a small van and you could go grab beers on Friday evening. And everything was monolithic. So we had a few servers. The servers were put in a rack, and then the application was put on these servers. And the management, well, we did that with something really cool, a tool you might all be familiar with, spreadsheets. So everything ended up in a spreadsheet, and that was just the way things were managed, which is fine if you're with like 6 people and have maybe over a dozen servers or maybe, 40. Well, it's still doable. But then we grew. So we had bigger teams, we had more teams. Technology changed at some point. So we did not only have servers with an application on them, but we're looking at the microservices architectures, trying out new technologies, just experimenting with that. So we actually expanded the team, and it was hard to do that with Excel sheets, as you can all imagine. So we created this CMDB. Which is basically like any CMDB you can put in where is the service, who owns the service, and somewhere where in the server park does that live. People could find out who was running maybe on call for some service, and that helped us a little bit for a while. But then suddenly, it was a bit later, and that's actually from around the period of this campaign Spotify had. It was around 2016, and Spotify was running into hypergrowth. But hypergrowth can also become hyper-confusing, because if you want to onboard in such a fast-growing company with all kinds of autonomous teams, then you can imagine it's hard to find specific knowledge, not the knowledge maybe from your team, but the other teams. So you leverage maybe some database somewhere, and you need to know something about it. It costs a lot of time to find the person, then track down the documentation, get access to the documentation. It's good that you have something like a CMDB, that you have a starting point, but it doesn't really actually help you. You experience friction. It's not fun onboarding. It takes a lot of time. People are unhappy. They leave. People left at some point, like, well, we're not happy here. This is a mess. I don't know how to get onboarded here. I don't feel productive. I'm not happy. So something had to be done about that. And there was this brilliant solution, and that was, well, let's create a portal for that. Let's create a developer portal. So we had this one team, and we put them together in the room, and we said, like, well, you know, find a solution for that. So they built this brilliant developer portal called System Z, and it had basically everything that we wanted at the time. So you could search for the services, you could see the relationships, you can see who's running on call, but also find the documentation. Also, you were able to use specific plugins and to get certain things done. Self-service. So you didn't need to reach out to other teams. You could just press the button and it would be deployed one way or another. But then, now, there was one big mistake. Did anyone here spot it? Please shout if you know. Come on. No one? It was one team. There was one team responsible for that developer platform. So that little group of people, they managed that platform for the whole organization. And everybody wanted something. So we had new domains. For instance, we had data engineers coming in. Well, they weren't prepared for that. There wasn't even a type of relationship for data engineering at that point. There had to be written specific tooling to make them productive and to help the self-service for that. But yeah, as one team, well, you can imagine the backlog. You know, having 1,000 engineers in your organization, everybody wants something, like, well, get added to the list. That was not really the way. And there was one thing that Spotify uses as a measurement, and that is the number of days it takes to get to the 10th pull request. And that number that went up to 60 days. Can you only imagine? It takes you 60 days to get to your 10th pull request. Now we can discuss about the number. Is that really a good one? Does everybody need to do pull requests? But that was the way of measurement. So that was actually unacceptable. Everything stalled at some point. Because that is the problem. Technologies evolved. The technology stack becomes increasingly complex. Different frameworks, different versions of frameworks, new domains, even more new domains. All kinds of things that are added, and it stalled. So when we added a new engineer, we basically slowed ourselves down. That's not productive anymore. So it had to be rethought. So they wrote this bold mission statement to prioritize the developers and the software and create a really great experience for everybody. So what they thought about is, the portal is good, but let's just like throw everything away and start from scratch. So how do you create a portal which you can extend, but you can also collaborate on, so that it is extensible and you can use inner sourcing to add functionality, so that people are not waiting for someone. Like the only thing that slows them down is their own capability or capacity. So they designed this from the ground up, everything based on plugins. And that was a huge hit. Because that way, if you had specific domain knowledge, you could create your own plugin. You would immediately have that in your developer portal. And you're also responsible for maintaining it. But that's not a problem because you own that domain knowledge. And that was not only to find the information, but it was also to give that self-service to people, to make sure that people could access your documentation, that they could see in what other projects it was used and how. So that was Backstage. That's a thing we do. We try to choose things related to music for the name. And it's a portal, as you can see already, like there's some plugins there, which we use internally. It was a huge hit. People loved it because they were able to actually collaborate and to contribute. So 80% of the contributions actually came from outside of the core team. So how big is that core team? Well, it's about 6 people, maybe 5. Over 120 plugins were contributed. Actually, there were, well, way more, but I think that only 120 are probably being used still. Yeah, that was totally productive. So that helped us tame our chaos, because we could keep the speed, but we had some safety checks and balances. We could use a lot of different technologies, but we could also easily onboard people. We could have that inner sourcing collaboration going on, because people were able to see what others were doing. We established some trust internally. And then, during Hack Week 2 years ago, a little bit over 2 years ago, they've decided to open source it. Let's just try and put it out there. And there's a number of reasons. People asked us because they saw the complicated drawings of our culture, and they were like, how do you even? We laugh, well, it's not really that way, but yeah, we use some tool called Backstage, and that's how we solved our problems. Well, can we get that tool? So that was asked again and again. And for us, there was another reason, because it's mission critical, because entirety of Spotify uses Backstage for the day-to-day work. It's a critical application for us. So it was open sourced and not much later donated to the CNCF. It's now in incubation stage, so that is really cool. We just achieved that a little over 2 months ago. So it's no longer a Spotify project, which is really great. It has a really active community with over 700 contributors. And then we would argue what is a contributor. Maybe it's even more, but I just look at some specifics for determining what is a contributor. And it's growing and growing. It's the 4th most popular project at this moment. Companies use it. Logo slide. I did the thing. Somebody take a picture of me. Yeah. Okay. But a lot of companies use this, and I do not show this because I want to sell you something. It is just for an open source project really important that companies invest in such a tool. Like literally, these companies build their whole developer experience on top of that one open source tool, and they contribute to it in one way or another. So enough with the talking. Let's go and take a look, because otherwise it would be a bit fluffy. So let's imagine another story. So I'm this developer. I'm a new hire at the world's coolest skill up, and not this world, but actually on Mars. It's a rocket company, Rocket, it's called, and they build rockets. Anyway, I'm hired to to work on an application. So when I joined, they told me that they use this developer portal, and that it's called Backstage, and they internally branded it as Rocket Engine. So during onboarding, I use a best practice, which is called Golden Pass, and this Golden Pass is basically what we also use at Spotify. I blatantly copied this, don't tell anyone. And it gets me through all kinds of different steps, and it helps me from understanding how's the engineering organization built. It helps me understand how we work together. It helps me understand how to set up my own developer box. It helps me understand how to deploy maybe my first microservice, maybe my first database, maybe my first application. So it helps me step by step, and not only by documenting it, but also by letting me experience it. So I also work in that way. So I literally just follow also the steps, and then I really get to know how it works. And that way, within the first or the second week, I've already deployed my first microservice. I have put up a database. Maybe I've collaborated with some other teams, and we even have a small test app. That's all possible using that best practice. So then I did all that, and well, of course I want to know what my team is up to. So I'm gonna go and check out what my team has. So there's a few applications here. Well, I'm hired to work on the Lunch app, so I'm gonna dive into that. So this is basically like the Facebook or MySpace page for this service. It shows me which team owns this, to which system it belongs, maybe who's running on call, which is me, which is worrisome because I just onboarded, but okay. The relationships to other stuff. I can maybe take a look at the pipelines. So I can see how it's doing. Maybe there was an error. I would maybe look at the steps, which one failed. This does not replace anything. It's just an aggregator, right? So all the information comes here, so I can just see that in one place. If there's an actual problem, I still would need to go, in this case, maybe to GitHub to check on my pipeline. Maybe I would go back to my IDE and maybe run prettier because I always forget that, and I put my documentation with my code. That all happens to me all the time. And there's numbers of plugins I could use here. I could look at the documentation. There's over 80 plugins, I think, at this moment for a lot of different things. There just been added something for the cloud carbon footprint, cost insights, there's fire hydrant, all kinds of stuff. Infrastructure as code, Cloudify just added a plugin. So there's a lot of things to choose from. And that is basically what you get when you have Backstage. You have all these plugins, and depending on what you need to solve, you can either write your own plugin, or you can grab it from the plugin repository and just start building on top of that. Okay, so I know a little bit more about the application. Of course, there was an API. I've seen that in the dependency graph. So I'm going to click on that one. So I can see that this is actually being managed by another team. I see here that there's two other applications using it. I could probably also find some documentation. But of course, the most important thing is that I just want to have a look at how it actually works and how I would need to go ahead and leverage this API. So this helps me really a lot already during my onboarding because I can understand what is happening. Or even when I just work there. Of course, there's many teams developing many microservices maybe, or maybe they just do a lot and it's difficult to keep track of everything. You just have here this one place where you just can find that information. So now I've built up a little bit more of my confidence. So the next thing I would do is maybe start writing my first application. So I want to extend the current application with some new functionality. I would leverage maybe the same API and by that way go ahead. What I'm going to do in this case, I'm going to create a React app. This is using software templates, which is our scaffolder service, uses cookie cutter under the hood. And what it does, this is a way to implement your software template. And the software template is actually a collection of skeleton files, but they could also include your best practices. So everything I would need to do to get started with my application and start writing code and be consistent and compliant and all the other things, I would just go ahead here and fill out this form. So I'm gonna do like this. Oh. Just put in a name, some description. I choose an owner. Owner is always a team. It can never be just one person, of course. This is my team, so I'm gonna do next. There's a few integrations I have set up here, so but it could also be other services. There's a lot to choose from. I'm gonna add my name and just deploy it and then create. So now it will actually fetch the skeleton. It will populate all the scripts with the right data I put in the form, and then it will start deploying it to the repository. It will add it to the catalog. And you might ask, well, what is the catalog? Well, we'll take a look at that in a minute. So I do not have to do anything, and I can just wait until this is published, and I can start working on my code. Well, we'll see it pop up in a bit. So this configuration, the metadata is all kept in YAML files because, yay, YAML. It is luckily something you do not have to write yourself, because if you use the software template, this gets all generated. Annotations is a way to put in your configuration, to extend it for maybe plugins. And also like the dependency information. It's all like pretty straightforward. It is quite straightforward to script this, to get this information from your existing sources. It's not here to replace or be the single source of truth. It's just to capture all those single sources of truth you have and put them all together in this one catalog. Just to make it easy, not open 30 tabs or anything. Okay, so let's take a look if it's there already. There you go. So it's been created, and this goes, of course, way faster than copying, cloning an existing repository, and yanking out everything you don't need, and then like be somewhat maybe compliant to the latest version. This is maybe a bit better to get started. So yeah, there's many different plugins. There's like, for instance, we're of course a fairly complicated company, so it's hard to get track of what is right technology to use or to play around with or stop using. So we have for that, for instance, the tech radar, so that we can see which technologies we should or shouldn't use. Always good to keep track of. There's, for instance, the internal marketplace, which I think is particularly useful if you need specific knowledge. In this case, a team needs somebody to work on CSS. Well, I could join this project, but I could also first take a look at the actual application. I always love to look at the pipeline. Okay, if I see this, I would not probably help this department actually, because this looks a bit messy. But as you can see, this project uses GitLab, and it's just the YAML file which depends with which plugin I show here. It's an if statement I put in there. So basically, Backstage is built, the whole stack is like React, TypeScript, and Node. So that's like quite straightforward to extend, and you can basically put in your if statement anywhere to display the information you think is relevant for the developer. Yeah, and another particular one is the Cost Insights. So Cost Insights is a plugin where you could grab the cost data, for instance, from Azure. You would like process that, and then you could see how much, for instance, your specific project costs. You could like also, which I think is really funny, use engineers, because I don't know what is this amount of 80,000 euros, but if they tell me that I could hire 13 engineers, well, for that money, that's a steal. I would hire the engineers. But but that helps understand, because if I have something running and it ran over budget, I'm like, care. But if it is like 2 engineers, then I'm like, ooh, I could like use somebody in DevRel to help me. I'm tired of traveling. Maybe I need to like hire somebody, but then I need to maybe make my services more efficient. Could be an example. So that is basically Backstage in a nutshell, because it is extensible. Sorry. And because it is extensible, every company has their own challenges, and they have their own plugins, and they have their own plugins they create themselves. It's really good to see what's happening. Now you're thinking, okay, cool, but we are not Spotify. And you're probably right. Why should you use a tool which is used by such a big company, because we don't have all that big problems? Well, as it turns out, a lot of the problems we face are also quite common at other companies. Small companies, big companies, banks, airlines. So, well, why not? Because there are these universal things that we should maybe care about, and that is developer experience in general. And that also brings me to the topic of developer productivity. So a bunch of smart people at Microsoft and GitHub and a university, Arizona, I think, they've put together like this space framework. And the space framework looks at these 5 axes. And it touches upon a few important topics, I think. I'm not going to do the whole space thing because I think I would run out of time now. But it comes down to these things like, are you happy at your work? And that doesn't mean, am I happy smiling? But do I feel that my work matters? Can I see that my work matters? How does it actually relate to the rest of the company? There's the topic of trust. You need to have trust to be productive. You need to have not too much friction. You know, you have this thing we call like the flow. I think you all recognize that you are in the flow, and then suddenly you're out of the flow because you need to do something like go to another portal or reach out to somebody on Slack, and the person doesn't work on the team anymore. You have to reach another person and another, and then suddenly there's some documents on Confluence somewhere. That's not productive. That gets you out of the flow and eventually slows you down. So basically it comes down to like a lot of things that give you friction are not good. And if you are frustrated because you can't find the right information or your onboarding experience was bad, chances are that you are maybe a bit unhappy. Research shows that if people, by the way, who onboard have a bad experience, that they most likely, I think over 80% might leave within a year. Those are some things to think about. If you want to collaborate internally, then you need to have visible what is there, and you have to have an easy way to share the ways of working with each other. But yeah, we have this funny tagline. I think it's funny. Printed it on t-shirts. It's happy developers make happy code. And well, it sounds cheesy. I think it's something to have. Like we all want to be happy and to be feel productive, right? And we need to see that, and we need to be able to measure it, and we need to be able to see what we have. So to summarize, Backstage is meant not maybe as a single pane of glass. I really hate that sentence, but it is one front end, and you can use that to aggregate all the information you have. Put all the different sources of docs to one place, so you can search and thus find them on one place. If I search for a service, I do not only need the service or the template to deploy it, maybe, but I would also like to see the documentation about it. So we've experienced now 3 main cases, use cases people use Backstage for, and that is creating. So that is like with software templates, in a few seconds, you just fill out the form, you deploy it. It is managing, so we were able to discover everything about the applications from our team, could read the documentation, could find out like maybe some status. And exploring. What is that API from that other team? How is that other team collaborating with each other? Documentation is not only technical, it's also organizational charts. Oh, there you go. What? Okay, so Backstage is just an interface. It's a bunch of plugins you put together. It's important to have autonomous team and work that way. Give people the responsibility over their own plugins, give them the freedom to do that. And of course, there's the topic of ownership. And that is that one team should own that metadata, even if you have an internal collaboration going on. Like one team should manage that data, because in the end of the day, that is basically the best way to do it. And it's like built into Backstage that way as well. So you have maybe a bazillion services, you have like onboarding new people, you don't know what to do with them. You have like a difficult understanding what you have running inside, maybe all the different versions of frameworks you have. Where do you begin? So you begin at the thing that you think is logical. Just start somewhere. Just don't try to solve everything. That we have 80 plugins doesn't mean that you need to use all the 80 plugins. Just start somewhere, just like I did with my demo environment. I just wanted to have to know, how I can create a ticket. I want to know who's running on call. I wanted a PagerDuty plugin. If that helps it, that's it. So if you want to learn more about Backstage and you want to give it for a spin, you can get it up and running anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes. We have just released some new learning experience. I would recommend you to try it out. There's also a course diving more deeper into all the specifics on how Backstage might help you, and some other information also on the space framework, which unfortunately, because of time, I was not able to cover. But I really recommend you reading up on that documentation because it's so valuable. Thank you very much. Super tak.